What if the man who built an empire of glass and steel in New York, who buried his heart the night he lost his wife and newborn daughter, suddenly discovered that the one piece of his soul he thought was gone forever was still alive, shivering in the snow? If stories of redemption, hidden family, and healing through love touch your heart, please like and subscribe to stay with us until the very last chapter of this journey. Snowflakes drifted across Fifth Avenue in slow spirals, settling on the golden-lit streets of Manhattan. Luxury stores glowed with their window displays, handcrafted ornaments, velvet dresses, and glittering diamonds, yet for Richard Hale, none of it mattered. At 45, he was the kind of man the Wall Street Journal had once called the relentless visionary. He had built Hale Technologies into a fortress of innovation, a skyscraper of ambition. And yet, on nights like this, standing by the glass of his black Bentley, he felt like nothing more than a hollow statue dressed in tailored suits. Because two ghosts followed him everywhere, his wife, Claire, and the daughter they had never gotten to raise, both taken years ago in a violent car accident outside Boston. At least, that's what the world believed. That's what he believed. He told himself he came out tonight to clear his head after a brutal board meeting. Truth was, he couldn't stand the silence of his penthouse. The walls echoed with absence. Richard adjusted the collar of his overcoat and started walking. His polished shoes cut across the thin blanket of snow. He passed tourists laughing with steaming cups of cocoa, a young couple kissing under fairy lights, a child pointing at the Rockefeller Christmas tree towering in the distance. The city roared with life. His heart, in contrast, was a locked vault. Until he saw her. On the steps outside an old bookstore, its shutters drawn, its neon sign buzzing faintly, sat a girl, no older than 12. She wasn't begging, wasn't moving, wasn't even looking at the glittering shops around her. She sat cross-legged on the cold stone, a worn-out paperback spread open on her lap. Her coat was too thin for this weather, her shoes scuffed, but her face glowed in the halo of the street lamp above. Her eyes scanned each line of the book with a concentration so fierce it froze Richard where he stood. Not because she looked lost, but because she looked familiar. His breath caught. Those eyes, gray-blue, sharp yet vulnerable, were the very eyes Claire had. Eyes he had seen reflected once in a hospital crib, only to lose them hours later. Richard took a step closer before he realized his hands were shaking. The girl looked up, startled. Her gaze landed on him, and for a second, the world vanished. Around her neck, dangling from a frayed silver chain, was a charm, a small pendant engraved with a single letter. R. Richard's chest constricted. That was his pendant, the one he had left in the crib of his daughter the night she was born, the one he thought was buried with her. The city sounds dimmed. His pulse thundered. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Where did you get that?" The girl instinctively covered the pendant with her palm. Her chin lifted with the stubborn pride of a child used to surviving alone. "It was my mom's," she said. "She told me it belonged to someone who once loved us." Richard staggered back a step. A tremor ripped through him. Claire. My God. Claire. Before he could gather words, a door creaked open behind the girl. A woman appeared, weary, her hair tied back in a loose bun. She looked around 38, maybe 40, but her face carried the weight of years. She had the kind of beauty that hardship tries and fails to erase. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "Richard," she whispered. Time collapsed. His legs nearly gave out. For 7 years he had lived with the certainty that Anna Carter, the woman who had been his wife's best friend, the one who vanished after the accident, was gone along with his daughter. And here she stood, very much alive, her hand resting protectively on the shoulder of the girl with the pendant. "Anna." His voice was raw, jagged. How How is this possible? Anna pulled the girl closer.
This is Emily,
she said, her voice trembling.
Your daughter.
The word slammed into Richard like a hammer. His daughter. Alive. Right in front of him, her breath fogging in the winter air, her small hands gripping the book as though it were armor. The ground beneath him might as well have cracked open. For years he had buried his grief beneath skyscrapers and contracts, beneath the mask of a ruthless billionaire. And now, with a single word, with the sight of a little girl clutching a pendant from the past, his world unraveled. He dropped to his knees in the snow, unable to stop the tears. Emily's frightened eyes darted to her mother, then back to him. She didn't move. But she didn't run either. Somewhere in the city, bells rang from St. Patrick's Cathedral, echoing through the frozen night, and for the first time in 7 years, Richard Hale dared to believe in miracles. Snow crunched under Richard's knees as he struggled to breathe. The world had tilted, as if Manhattan itself had shifted on its axis. The girl, Emily, clutched her book to her chest, wide-eyed, uncertain. The woman at her side, Anna Carter, kept her arms protectively around her daughter, her gaze torn between fear and recognition. Richard's voice broke the silence. Anna, you're alive. She's alive. Anna's lips pressed together, trembling. You shouldn't be here. Richard staggered to his feet. His breath formed clouds in the freezing air. Shouldn't be here? Anna, for 7 years I believed you both were gone. I buried my wife. I buried my child. And now you're telling me... He stopped, his throat closing. She's mine? Emily shifted uncomfortably under the weight of the words. Anna tightened her grip on her daughter's shoulder. She's mine, Anna said firmly. And you don't know what we've been through. The bitterness in her tone stung sharper than the winter wind. Richard tried to steady himself, but his pulse thundered in his ears. The lights of Fifth Avenue blurred as tears pricked his eyes. Please, he said quietly. I need to understand. Anna's expression hardened, but her voice carried exhaustion more than anger. Not here. Not like this. Come tomorrow if you must. But tonight, we go home. Emily tugged on her mother's sleeve. Mommy, who is he? Anna hesitated. Her lips parted as if to form a lie, then shut again. Finally, she whispered, Someone who once meant something. The words cut Richard open. Once meant something. He wanted to scream, to shake her, to demand the truth, but Emily's innocent eyes silenced him. He couldn't frighten her. Not tonight. Anna turned, guiding Emily down the street. Richard stood frozen, his heart clawing at his chest. He watched their figures vanish into the crowd, swallowed by the glow of Christmas lights. For years, he had lived with ghosts. Now those ghosts had blood, breath, and names. Back at his penthouse overlooking Central Park, Richard poured 2 fingers of scotch into a crystal glass but never drank. He sat at the grand piano Claire once loved, his hands hovering over the keys. Music had abandoned him the night she died, and it still refused to return. His reflection in the polished lid looked like a stranger, haunted, haggard, and older than his years. Anna alive. Emily alive. But why had they been hidden from him? Why had she allowed him to mourn, to drown in guilt and grief? Unless it wasn't by choice. His mind sharpened, business instincts taking over. He replayed the accident. The black SUV that had swerved into their car, the fire, the official reports that declared no survivors except him. He remembered the insurance company's unusual delays, the quiet pressure from investors to focus on work instead of investigating. He remembered one man in particular, Gerald Whitmore, his deputy at Hale Technologies, who had grown powerful in his absence. Richard's knuckles whitened around the glass. It wasn't just tragedy. There had been a hand guiding it, and Anna, she must have lived through it differently. The next afternoon, Richard found himself in Brooklyn. The neighborhood was nothing like the glossy towers he ruled. The brownstone facades were cracked. Christmas wreaths faded from past winters. Children played in the snow with second-hand scarves, their laughter cutting through the gray. Anna's apartment was on the third floor of a building that smelled of damp wood and old cooking oil. He knocked. The door opened a fraction, the chain still latched. Anna's wary eyes appeared in the gap. "You actually came." "Of course I came." His voice was low, urgent. "We need to talk." She hesitated, then slid the chain free. Inside, the apartment was small but tidy. A futon doubled as a couch. A chipped table held a vase with one wilted flower. On the windowsill, Emily's books were stacked neatly. The girl herself sat at the table, scribbling with colored pencils, her tongue poking out in concentration. Richard's heart clenched at the ordinary beauty of it. Anna gestured stiffly toward a chair. "Don't get comfortable. This isn't your home." He sat, his tailored coat too large for the cramped space. Tell me why you disappeared. Why I thought you were dead." Anna's shoulders stiffened. She busied herself with a kettle on the stove, though it wasn't turned on. Finally, she spoke, her back still to him. "After the crash, I woke up in a clinic outside Boston. They told me Claire hadn't made it. They told me you—" She broke off, inhaled sharply. "They told me you abandoned us, that you wanted nothing to do with a child that wasn't perfect." Richard shot up from his chair. "That's a lie. My God, Anna, I mourned you both. I would have—" His voice cracked. "I would have given everything." She turned then, her eyes blazing. "I didn't know what to believe. They had papers, doctors, lawyers. Every door I knocked on closed in my face. And when Emily got sick, when I couldn't afford medicine, no one cared. So don't you dare stand here in your $1,000 coat and tell me what you would have done." The raw pain in her voice silenced him. He saw not just the woman he remembered, but the years carved into her face, the struggle, the loneliness, the betrayal. Emily looked up from her drawing, sensing the tension. "Mommy?" Anna knelt quickly beside her daughter, smoothing her hair. "It's fine, sweetheart. Keep drawing." She shot Richard a look that warned him not to push further, but Richard's eyes had already fallen on the drawing. It was a family of 3, a woman, a girl, and a man. The man's face was smudged, half-finished, as if Emily wasn't sure how to complete it. Emotion clawed up his throat. He crouched down, his voice gentle. "Is that your family?" Emily nodded shyly. "That's Mommy. That's me. And that's—" She paused. "That's the man I don't know yet." The words landed like a blade and a bomb all at once. Richard swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in his eyes. Anna rose, folding her arms. "You've seen enough. Leave us alone, Richard, for her sake." But Richard straightened, his resolve hardening. "No. For her sake, I can't. Not anymore. Whatever lies we're told, whatever shadows have haunted us, I'll find the truth. And I'll protect her. Both of you." Anna's lips pressed tight, torn between fury and the faintest flicker of hope. Outside, snow began to fall again, dusting the cracked windows with white. Emily glanced up, watching it swirl height, her hand resting on the pendant at her neck. She didn't yet understand the storm that had begun to stir around her. But Richard did, and for the first time in years, he felt something stronger than grief. Purpose. The door slammed behind him with a finality that echoed in Richard's chest. Anna's command, "Leave us alone," still rang in his ears. He stood in the dimly lit hallway of the Brooklyn apartment building, fists clenched, his breath fogging in the cold draft that seeped through the cracked windows. For years he had carried grief like a shroud. Now grief had a new shape. Fury. Not at Anna, not at Emily, but at the invisible hands that had orchestrated this nightmare. When he finally stepped outside into the brittle winter air, he didn't call his driver. He walked, his polished shoes crunching against the icy pavement, past bodegas and shuttered laundromats, until his anger cooled into determination. He needed answers. By the next morning, Richard was back in Manhattan inside the sterile steel and glass fortress of Hale Technologies. The boardroom on the top floor offered a sweeping view of Central Park, but Richard barely noticed. Around the long mahogany table sat the men and women who claimed loyalty to him but had long ago grown comfortable feeding on his absence. At the head of the table, Gerald Whitmore adjusted his cufflinks. Silver hair, a smile polished for Fortune magazine covers, eyes sharp as razors. "Richard," Gerald drawled, "I didn't expect you back so soon after last night's meeting. You seemed unsettled." Richard slid into his chair, his gaze unflinching. "Some things never settle, Gerald. Especially lies." A ripple of discomfort passed around the table. Gerald's smile never wavered. "Careful, old friend. Paranoia is unbecoming of a man in your position." Richard leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Tell me, Gerald, where were you the night of the crash?" The room went silent. Board members exchanged glances. Gerald chuckled softly, as if humoring a delusional child. "We've been over this, Richard. That accident was tragic. We all mourned Claire and the child. To dredge it up again..." He spread his hands. "It isn't healthy." But Richard saw it. Just a flicker, a tightening at the corner of Gerald's jaw. The mask was flawless, but not impenetrable. He stood, buttoning his coat. "Enjoy your meeting. I have work to do." As he strode out, Gerald's voice followed, calm but edged with steel. "Be careful what doors you open, Richard. Some won't close again." That evening, Richard found himself once more in Brooklyn. He told himself he'd come to check on Emily, to assure her he wasn't a phantom. But in truth, he needed Anna's help. The apartment door opened only after his third knock. Anna stood framed in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression torn between defiance and weariness. "You don't listen, do you?" she said. "Not when it comes to my daughter," Richard replied. At the sound of the word daughter, Emily's head poked out from behind her mother. She clutched the same book as before, her eyes lighting up briefly before she remembered to school her face. Anna rested a protective hand on her shoulder. "Go finish your homework, sweetheart," Anna murmured. Reluctantly, Emily retreated, leaving the adults in tense silence. Richard stepped inside. The apartment smelled faintly of boiled rice and laundry soap. It was humble but spotless, every surface carefully tended. Anna lived as though the world were waiting to take everything away, because it had, time and again. "I spoke to Gerald Whitmore today," Richard began. Anna stiffened. "I know that name." "Of course you do," Richard said grimly. "He's the one who visited you in that clinic, isn't he?" Her eyes widened, then narrowed. "How do you know that?" "I don't," Richard admitted. "But I know him, and I know how he operates." Anna sank into the armchair, rubbing her temples. "He was there, not just once. He came with papers, with men in suits. They told me Claire's death was unavoidable. They told me you wanted the child out of sight. They said you'd sign anything to erase the mistake." Her voice broke. "And when I demanded proof, they showed me documents with your signature." Richard's stomach twisted. "Forged," he whispered. It had to be. Anna looked up, her eyes glistening. I wanted to believe that. But when every door slammed in my face, when no one returned my calls, she shook her head. I thought it was true. He crouched before her, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. Anna, listen to me. I never turned away from you. I never knew you were alive. Someone wanted us apart. Someone wanted Emily hidden. And I intend to find out why. For a long moment, Anna searched his face as if trying to find the man she once trusted. Finally, she exhaled, her shoulders sagging. There's something you need to see, she said. She rose, walked to the narrow hallway, and opened the closet. From the top shelf, she pulled down a shoebox bound with string. She set it on the table and untied it, revealing a stack of letters, medical reports, and legal notices. They came every month for a year, Anna said. Threats, reminders, bills I couldn't pay. And then, silence. As if whoever was behind it decided I was no longer worth the trouble. But I kept them. Richard picked up one letter. The letterhead bore the name Whitmore & Comey Legal Associates. His blood ran cold. It was him, Richard whispered. Before Anna could reply, a faint sound drifted from the hallway. A shuffle. A click. Richard's instincts sharpened. He strode to the door and yanked it open. No one. Just the echo of footsteps fading down the stairwell. Anna clutched Emily, who had emerged from her room, frightened. What is it? Someone was listening, Richard said grimly, scanning the hall. Someone who doesn't want us talking. He shut the door, locking it firmly. His heart pounded, but his voice was steady. This isn't just about us, Anna. It's bigger, and whoever's behind it won't stop until they've erased every trace of the truth. Anna hugged Emily closer, her knuckles white. Richard met her gaze. We can't run anymore, he said. We fight. Together. Outside, the snow fell heavier, muffling the city's noise, as though Manhattan itself were holding its breath. And behind the closed door of a small Brooklyn apartment, a storm long buried began to awaken. The next morning, Richard returned to Brooklyn with a heaviness in his chest. Sleep had been impossible. His mind replayed the letters Anna had shown him, the forged documents with his signature, the whisper of footsteps fleeing into the night. Someone had been watching them. Someone still was. Anna answered the door with dark circles under her eyes. Emily clung to her mother's arm, her hair mussed from restless sleep. She brightened slightly when she saw Richard, though quickly tried to mask it. Are you here to fight me again? Anna asked flatly. No, Richard said softly. I'm here to listen. They sat at the chipped kitchen table. Outside, the hum of the city seeped through the thin windows. Sirens in the distance, the clatter of delivery trucks, the muffled laughter of school children on their way to class. Inside, the apartment felt like a confessional. Anna spread out the letters again, her fingers trembling as she touched each one. After the accident, she began, I woke in a clinic outside Boston. My ribs were broken, my skull fractured. They told me Claire was dead. Her voice caught. They said you didn't want the baby. Richard flinched. I thought they were lying, Anna continued. But then Gerald came. He said you were drowning in grief, that you wanted to start fresh. He brought papers, custody waivers, medical releases, all with your name signed neatly at the bottom. And when I refused to sign anything, the letters started coming. She pulled one from the pile. The ink was smudged from years, but the words were clear. If you want your daughter to survive, keep your mouth shut. Richard's jaw tightened. Threats.
Yes.
Anna's eyes glistened. And bills I couldn't pay, medical expenses that somehow kept piling up even though I was never given treatment beyond the basics. They kept me quiet, Richard. They made me believe I had no one. She paused, her gaze distant. When Emily was 4, she got pneumonia. I had no insurance, no money. I begged the hospital for help. Do you know what saved her? Richard shook his head. Anna lifted her daughter's hand gently. A student nurse. She slipped me antibiotics from her own supply, whispered that she couldn't watch a child die. If not for her, Emily wouldn't be here. Richard's throat burned. He had been fighting boardroom battles while Anna and his daughter had been fighting for their lives in forgotten corners of the city. He reached across the table, covering Anna's trembling hand with his. She froze, then slowly withdrew, as though afraid to need his warmth. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "I should have found you. I should have questioned everything." Anna's laugh was brittle. "How could you? You thought we were dead. That's what makes it so perfect, doesn't it?" Her bitterness wasn't toward him. It was toward the faceless men who had orchestrated it all. That night, Richard insisted on walking Anna and Emily home from the grocery store. The snow had thickened, muffling the honks and chatter of Brooklyn streets. Emily skipped ahead, clutching a paper bag filled with apples, humming to herself. For a brief moment, Richard let himself imagine what life might have been. Claire alive, Emily raised in warmth, their family whole. The ache nearly doubled him over. They turned a corner, and Richard stopped dead. A black sedan idled across the street, its headlights off. The windows were tinted, but he could feel the eyes inside, watching. Anna stiffened.
They've been there before, she whispered. Always parked. Always waiting.
Richard's blood ran cold. He ushered Anna and Emily inside quickly, locking the door behind them. Through the thin curtains, he saw the car pull away, tires hissing on the snow. Emily looked up, wide-eyed. "Mommy, why do those men follow us?" Anna knelt, smoothing her daughter's hair with forced calm. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Just shadows." But Richard knew better. Shadows didn't follow unless commanded. Later, when Emily was asleep, Richard confronted Anna in the living room. The single lamp cast a warm glow over her weary face. "This isn't random," Richard said. "Gerald is keeping tabs on you. On Emily. He knows I found you." Anna sank onto the sofa. "What does he want from us? I'm nothing. We're nothing." Richard crouched before her. "You're not nothing. You're the proof. If the world knew what he did, hiding you, forging documents, threatening a mother and child, it would destroy him. That's why he's afraid. That's why he keeps you under surveillance." Anna's eyes searched his. "And what about you, Richard? Why risk everything now?" He didn't hesitate. "Because I lost you once. I won't lose you again." For the first time, her hardened facade cracked. Her eyes shimmered, her lips parting as if to say something. Then she closed them tight, shaking her head. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It's not just Gerald. There were others. Investors. Doctors. People with power. If we fight them, they'll come after Emily. And I can't." Her voice broke. "I can't let them take her." Richard placed a hand over hers. "Then we don't let them. We fight smarter. We expose them." Anna looked at him for a long time, torn between hope and terror. Finally, she whispered, "There's something I never told you." She rose, walking to the small desk tucked into the corner. From a hidden drawer, she pulled out a single folded page, yellowed with age. She handed it to him. Richard unfolded it. It was a hospital record from the night of the crash. But there,
Scrawled in the corner was a note in hurried handwriting. Transfer mother and child, per GW's instruction. Confidential. Richard's breath caught. G.W. Gerald Whitmore. The walls of the room seemed to close in. The betrayal was no longer suspicion, it was fact. Anna's voice trembled. Now you know why I ran, why I hid. Because if they could erase me once, they could do it again. And next time, Emily might not survive. Richard folded the page carefully, tucking it into his coat. His heart pounded, not with despair, but with resolve. Then they'll have to come through me first, he said. Outside, the black sedan reappeared at the curb, its engine humming softly under the snow. The shadows of the past had found them again. But this time, Richard wasn't walking away. The glass tower of Hale Technologies loomed over Midtown Manhattan like a citadel of steel and ambition. Inside, the boardroom buzzed with quiet conversation as men and women in tailored suits arranged their notes, sipping espresso from porcelain cups. The winter sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows over the polished mahogany table. Richard Hale entered without ceremony. His presence silenced the room instantly. The aura he carried had once commanded absolute loyalty, but years of grief and Gerald Whitmore's growing influence had eroded that respect. Now, every glance held calculation, every smile concealed agendas. Gerald sat at the far end, as if he were the true master of the room. His silver hair gleamed under the light, his cufflinks flashing like weapons. "Richard," he said smoothly, rising half an inch from his chair before settling back down. "We're honored by your appearance." Richard placed a folder on the table with deliberate force. "I won't waste time. Last night, I found evidence, hospital records that link directly to you, Gerald. Records showing that after the accident, my wife's best friend and my daughter were secretly transferred on your instruction." A ripple of shock swept through the room. One of the younger directors dropped her pen. Another exchanged a startled look with her neighbor. Gerald, however, smiled with serpent-like calm. "Accusations without proof," he said lightly, "and coming from a man whose grief has clearly clouded his judgment." Richard slid the document across the table. The note scrawled in the margin glared like a wound. "Transfer mother and child, per GW's instruction." "Proof enough," Richard growled. Gerald didn't even glance at the page. "Anyone could have written that. An assistant, a nurse. You yourself, perhaps, in one of your breakdowns." He leaned forward, his smile sharp. "We all remember those, don't we? The nights you drank yourself half to death, the months you abandoned this company." The board shifted uncomfortably. Richard's face hardened. He had been vulnerable, yes, but never complicit. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about a child. My child. A child you tried to erase." For the first time, Gerald's eyes flickered. Then he chuckled, low and dangerous. "Be very careful, Richard. Dragging your private tragedies into this room won't save you. Hale Technologies has grown under my stewardship. Investors trust me. If you insist on slandering me with fairy tales, perhaps it's time we put your position to a vote." Murmurs rose around the table. Richard scanned the faces, some sympathetic, others eager for blood. The trap was set. Gerald wasn't just covering his tracks. He was preparing to oust Richard entirely. Richard straightened, his voice steady despite the storm inside. "You can vote me out of this company, Gerald. You can strip my titles, my fortune, my name, but you will never silence me. Not while my daughter breathes." The words hit the room like thunder. Even Gerald's composure cracked for half a second, his knuckles tightening on the table. Before anyone could respond, the double doors burst open. Margaret Hill, Richard's longtime assistant, loyal, sharp, unflinching, strode in. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. She carried a slim envelope in her hands. Mr. Hale, she said urgently. This just arrived at the reception desk. It was addressed to you, but there's no sender. Richard took the envelope. His instincts screamed. He tore it open. Inside was a single photograph. Emily, his daughter, playing in the snow outside Anna's apartment. A red circle had been drawn around her tiny frame. Beneath the photo, typed in block letters, "Keep quiet, or she disappears." The boardroom dissolved into a blur. Richard's pulse roared in his ears. His vision tunneled on the image of his daughter, so vulnerable, targeted by faceless predators. Gerald's smile returned, faint but unmistakable. He didn't need to say a word. The message was clear. Richard crushed the photo in his fist. "This ends now," he muttered. But deep down, he knew the storm was only beginning. The day after the boardroom confrontation, Richard couldn't shake the image of that photograph, the red circle drawn around Emily's small frame, the threat typed in cold block letters. Every instinct told him to pull Anna and Emily out of Brooklyn immediately, to hide them in a fortress of steel and glass where no shadow could reach. But he also knew that fear was exactly what Gerald wanted. Instead, Richard chose another path: vigilance. It was Saturday afternoon when Richard suggested they take Emily to Central Park. Anna hesitated at first. She distrusted his world, his promises, his sudden determination to protect a child she had raised alone. But Emily's pleading eyes won her over. The park was alive with winter. Families strolled under the bare trees. Couples skated on the frozen pond. Children laughed as they built snowmen along the winding paths. Emily darted ahead, her red scarf trailing like a banner, her cheeks flushed with joy. For once, the shadows seemed far away. Richard walked beside Anna, his hands buried in the pockets of his wool coat. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the crunch of snow underfoot. "You don't have to do this," Anna murmured. "Do what?" "Play father. Pretend protector. You've got a company to run, a life to live." Richard stopped walking. "She's my daughter. That's not pretend. And protecting her is the only life I want now." Anna searched his face, as if weighing the sincerity in his words. For the briefest moment, her walls seemed to waver. But then Emily called out, and the moment was gone. They reached the carousel near the southern end of the park. Emily begged for a ride, and Richard bought her a ticket. He watched her climb onto a painted horse, her laughter ringing like music he hadn't heard in years. Then, as the carousel spun, Richard noticed something odd. A man in a long overcoat lingered near the benches, his face obscured by a scarf pulled high against the cold. He wasn't watching the carousel. He was watching Emily. Richard's body tensed. He moved toward the man, but before he could reach him, the stranger turned and melted into the crowd. When Richard returned to the bench, Emily was hopping off the carousel, her book clutched tightly to her chest. Anna frowned. "Where did you get that?" Emily held up the worn paperback. "A man gave it to me. He said it was for Daddy." Richard's heart nearly stopped. He took the book, flipping through the pages until a folded envelope slipped out. His name, Richard Hale, was typed neatly on the front. He tore it open. Inside was a letter. Short and brutal. "You are closer than you think. The accident was never an accident. Gerald is only one piece of the machine. Follow the money. And protect the girl because they won't stop until she's gone." At the bottom, a signature. Only the initials, M.H. Richard's pulse hammered. Margaret Hill, his trusted assistant. She must have risked everything to smuggle this to him. He shoved the letter into his coat just as Emily tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, why do you look scared?" He forced a smile, though his heart thundered. "I'm not scared, sweetheart. I'm just thinking." But Anna wasn't fooled. She pulled him aside, her voice sharp. "What was in that letter?" Proof, Richard whispered. Proof that Gerald isn't working alone.
And that Emily's in more danger than we imagined. That night, after Emily had fallen asleep, Richard and Anna sat in the cramped living room of the Brooklyn apartment. The letter lay between them on the table, its words like a blade cutting through the silence. "Follow the money," Anna said softly. "What does that mean?" Richard rubbed his temples. "It means Gerald is fronting for someone bigger. Investors, perhaps. People with everything to lose if the truth about that night comes out. And the money trail, bank accounts, shell companies, will lead to them." Anna folded her arms. "So what do we do?" Richard looked at her. "We dig, we find what they're hiding, and when we have enough, we go public. But until then..." He glanced toward Emily's room, where the sound of her gentle breathing carried through the thin walls. "Until then, she doesn't leave our sight." Anna's eyes softened, though fear still lingered. "She deserves better than living like prey." "She will," Richard promised. "I swear it." The next morning, Richard arrived at Hale Technologies before dawn. The city was still asleep, the streets dusted with fresh snow. In his office, he logged into the company's secure servers, tracing financial records with the precision of a surgeon. At first, everything looked clean. Too clean. Then he noticed a series of transfers, small enough to escape notice, but consistent. Funds siphoned from the company's healthcare research division into a shell corporation registered in Delaware. The name, New Horizons, LLC. Richard's stomach turned. He knew that name. It had appeared in one of the hospital invoices Anna had shown him. The bills she couldn't pay, stamped rejected, paid by New Horizons. They weren't just hiding Anna. They were using her. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or the girl disappears." Richard's blood ran cold. He slammed the laptop shut, shoving the phone into his pocket. The shadows were no longer distant. They were inside his walls, inside his company. That evening, Richard returned to Brooklyn, his face pale, his jaw tight. Anna saw it instantly. "What happened?" He handed her the letter from Central Park, then the phone with the new message. Her hand trembled as she read. "They know," she whispered. "They know you're digging." Richard nodded grimly. "And they're watching every move." From the bedroom, Emily's small voice carried, "Mommy? Daddy?" The word "daddy" pierced Richard's chest like sunlight breaking through a storm. He rose, forcing calm into his voice. "It's all right, sweetheart. We're right here." But as he stood in the doorway watching his daughter clutch the silver pendant at her neck, Richard knew the truth. The war had already begun. Snow fell in heavy curtains over Brooklyn, turning the streets into a blur of white. It was the kind of storm that silenced the city, muffling sirens, hiding footfalls. For Richard Hale, it was the perfect cover for the enemy he feared most. Emily had begged to walk home from school. "It's just a few blocks, Daddy," she'd pleaded that morning, her red scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. "Please, everyone else gets to." Richard had hesitated. After the photograph, the letter in Central Park, and the threatening text message, he trusted nothing. Not the streets, not strangers, not even shadows. But Anna had taken his hand and said softly, "We can't lock her away, Richard. She needs a childhood, not a prison." So they compromised. Richard would meet her halfway, standing at the corner of 7th Avenue where the snow piled against shuttered storefronts. He checked his watch as he waited, his heart pounding louder with every passing second. Then, screams. Richard sprinted toward the sound. Emily's backpack lay torn open on the icy sidewalk, her pencils and books scattered across the snow like fallen soldiers. Her scarf trailed into the street.
and Emily herself was gone. Richard's chest seized. He whirled, eyes scanning. A black van sped around the corner, tires screeching on slush, a small figure struggling in the back seat. "Emily!" He lunged into the street, but the van roared past, its taillights swallowed by the storm. For the first time since Claire's death, Richard felt his knees buckle. But he forced himself upright, pulling his phone from his pocket with shaking hands. Anna's scream echoed through the tiny apartment when he called. "No, no, no, Richard, where is she?" "I'll find her," he said, though his voice was raw. "Listen to me, Anna. Stay inside. Lock every door. They'll expect you to panic. Don't give them the chance." Her sobs cracked through the line. "She's all I have. Don't you dare lose her." Richard swallowed the lump in his throat. "She's all I have, too." Within the hour, Richard stormed into the private office of Margaret Hill, his most trusted confidant. She looked up from her desk, startled by his wild eyes and snow-drenched coat. "They have her," Richard said hoarsely. "Emily's been taken." Margaret paled. "Oh, my God." She quickly shut the door, lowering her voice. "Did you see who?" "A black van. No plates I could catch, but I know who's behind it." Richard's fists trembled. "Gerald, he wants leverage, and now he has it." Margaret's face tightened. "Then you'll need to play his game until we can outmaneuver him." Richard slammed his hand against the desk. "I don't have time for games. That's my daughter." Margaret met his rage with steady eyes. "Then you'll need allies, because you can't fight Gerald's machine alone." That night, Richard received the call. The voice was distorted, mechanical. "Mr. Hale, if you want to see the girl alive, you will attend tomorrow's board meeting. You will announce your resignation. You will transfer all voting power to Gerald Whitmore. Do this, and she lives. Refuse, and she disappears forever." Richard's grip tightened on the phone. "If you harm her, she is unharmed, for now. But time is not your friend." The line went dead. Richard collapsed into the nearest chair, his chest heaving. He was a man who had once ruled boardrooms with iron precision, who had bent billion-dollar markets to his will, and now his empire was nothing compared to the life of one girl. Hours later, Richard found himself outside the police precinct in Manhattan. He'd intended to go inside, to demand every resource, every officer, every helicopter. But he stopped at the steps. He knew the truth. Gerald's reach went deep. If the police became involved too soon, Emily's life could be cut short in retaliation. So he turned away. Meanwhile, Emily sat shivering in the back of the van. Her wrists were bound, her small face streaked with tears. But even in terror, her mind raced. Her mother had always told her stories of bravery, of speaking truth even when afraid. And her father, her real father, the man she'd only just begun to know, had promised he would protect her. She clung to that promise like a lifeline. A guard sat across from her, his hood pulled low. She whispered, "My dad will come for me." The guard chuckled darkly. "Your dad's the reason you're here, little one." Emily lifted her chin, tears glittering. "Then he'll be the reason I get out." Back in his penthouse, Richard stood by the window overlooking the snowy skyline of Manhattan. The city glittered below, indifferent to his torment. He pulled the folded hospital record from his coat pocket, the one with Gerald's initials scribbled in the margin. Gerald had stolen 7 years from him. Now he had stolen his daughter. Richard's reflection stared back from the glass, gaunt and furious. "You took everything from me once," he whispered. "Never again." Behind him, Margaret entered quietly. "I've been digging," she said, placing a thin folder on the table. "New Horizons LLC isn't just a shell. It's funding a clinical trial. Illegal. Unapproved. They needed Anna and Emily to disappear because she saw too much. Richard's eyes sharpened. Where? Margaret hesitated. An abandoned facility outside Newark. If Emily's being held anywhere, it's there. Richard grabbed his coat. Then that's where I'm going. Margaret caught his arm. Richard, wait. If you storm in alone, you'll lose everything, including her. He pulled free, his jaw set. Then help me make sure I don't. Far from the glittering skyline, in a warehouse chilled by leaking drafts, Emily curled up on a cot. She pressed her bound hands against the pendant at her neck, the small silver charm marked with the letter R. Snowflakes drifted through a crack in the roof, melting against her skin. She closed her eyes and whispered into the dark, "Daddy, find me." And somewhere in Manhattan, Richard Hale swore he would. The storm still battered the city when Richard Hale stood in the penthouse study, the skyline of Manhattan hidden behind a curtain of snow. His fists rested on the desk, knuckles white, the folder Margaret had uncovered lying open before him. New Horizons, LLC, a shell corporation laundering millions through Hale Technologies' healthcare division. Money funneled into black sites, funding trials so dangerous they couldn't withstand daylight. And now, Emily was in their hands. Margaret paced across the rug, her heels tapping nervously. You can't walk into Newark blind, Richard. Gerald has an army, lawyers, security, maybe even men inside the NYPD. If you go alone, you'll disappear just like Anna almost did. Richard lifted his eyes. Then who do I trust? The answer came not from Margaret, but from the doorway. A tall man in a gray overcoat stepped inside. Detective Daniel Cross, once Richard's closest ally before the accident had driven them apart. You don't trust anyone, Daniel said grimly, but you use them. That's how you survive in this city. Richard's chest tightened. Why are you here? Daniel dropped a folder onto the desk. Inside were surveillance photos of Gerald meeting with men Richard didn't recognize, men in medical coats, their faces blurred by distance. Because I know what Gerald's building, Daniel said. And I know he's not working alone. Margaret frowned. Who are they? Daniel hesitated. Executives from Larkridge Pharmaceuticals. They've been under investigation for years. Illegal trials, disappearing patients. Gerald's been their inside man, siphoning Hale Technologies' resources to cover their tracks. Richard's stomach twisted. And Emily is their leverage. Daniel's gaze hardened. Exactly. They don't care about her, except as a pawn. But if you're going to get her back, you need to understand something. There's a mole. Someone close to you, feeding Gerald everything. The room went still. Richard's mind raced. The threats, the photograph, the way the black van had been in the right place at the right time. He turned slowly toward Margaret. Her face paled. You think it's me? You were the only one who knew my schedule yesterday, Richard said quietly. You were the one who handed me the envelope in the boardroom. Her eyes flashed. I risked everything to get that letter to you. Do you think Gerald would have let me walk away alive if I were his? Daniel stepped forward. She's telling the truth. Gerald's real informant is higher up, someone with more power than an assistant. Richard's heart sank. The answer hit him with brutal clarity. The board. The next day, Richard entered Hale Technologies with a fury burning in his chest. The boardroom was full. Gerald seated at the head as if he were already king. Ah, Richard, Gerald purred. I wasn't sure you'd show up. After all, fathers under stress often make rash decisions. Richard threw the surveillance photos onto the table. You've been selling this company piece by piece to Larkridge Pharmaceuticals. You forged documents, you faked deaths, you turned my family into collateral. Gasps rippled across the table. One board member stammered, "Is this true, Gerald?" Gerald leaned back, his smile razor-thin. Photographs, shadows, nothing more. Besides, who would you rather trust? The man who built this empire from grief, or the man who abandoned it for a ghost? Richard slammed his fist onto the table. That ghost is alive. My daughter is alive, and you tried to kill her. The room erupted in murmurs. Gerald raised a hand, silencing them. Enough! This company cannot survive your delusions. The vote will proceed as planned. But before he could continue, Daniel stepped into the room, badge flashing. Not today. The board froze. Gerald's eyes narrowed. You brought the police into my company? Daniel smirked. Correction. You brought crime into this company. I'm just here to escort it out. For a moment, Richard felt victory within reach. Then a familiar voice spoke from the corner. Detective Cross. Always the loyal watchdog. But even watchdogs can be bought. Richard turned. One of his own directors, Robert Klein, someone he had trusted for years, rose slowly from his seat. He wasn't holding a vote. He was holding a gun. The room erupted in chaos. Board members screamed, ducking beneath the table. Gerald didn't flinch. He simply smiled, his mask slipping at last into something cruel. You see, Richard? Gerald said softly. This isn't about business, it never was. It's about power. And men like me, we don't lose. Robert Klein stepped forward, the gun steady in his hand. You should have stayed in your grief, Richard. Now you've dragged your daughter into something she'll never walk out of. Richard's blood ran cold. Gerald wasn't bluffing. This was the man with two faces, the trusted colleague who had dined at his table, toasted his successes, all while betraying him. He raised his hands slowly, his voice steel. If you touch her, if you harm Emily, I swear. Gerald cut him off. Swear what? That you'll destroy me? You can't even protect your own child. The boardroom doors burst open again. Margaret charged in, wielding a stun baton stolen from building security. She jabbed it into Robert Klein's arm before he could fire. The gun clattered to the floor, sliding beneath the table. Daniel dove, kicking it out of reach. Board members scrambled for the exits. Gerald stood, his composure cracking for the first time. This isn't over, he hissed. You've just made it blood. He slipped out a side door before Richard could stop him. Richard bent to pick up the discarded gun, his hands trembling. He had stared into the face of betrayal, and now there was no turning back. Somewhere out there, Emily was still in danger, and Gerald still held the strings. The snowstorm had passed, leaving Manhattan slick and shining under the pale glow of street lamps. Yet inside Richard Hale's penthouse, the atmosphere was darker than the storm itself. Emily was still missing, and every second stretched like an eternity. Margaret Hill sat stiffly at the dining table, her notebook open, scribbled with names, dates, and corporate shell structures. Detective Daniel Cross stood by the window, scanning the skyline as though the city might yield answers if only he stared hard enough. Richard paced the room like a caged lion. Gerald has Emily, he muttered, but he's not acting alone. Someone fed him everything, Anna's address, Emily's routine, even my board schedule. Someone close. Daniel turned. Then the first question is, who benefits most if you disappear? Richard froze. The answer came instantly. The board. The following morning, Richard entered Hale Technologies with a storm of resolve in his chest. The board had gathered again, summoned under Gerald Whitmore's pretense of an urgent restructuring discussion. Gerald rose as Richard entered, his silver hair gleaming, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Richard," he drawled, "how good of you to join us. I trust you've had time to reflect on your position." Richard ignored him, dropping a stack of documents onto the polished mahogany table. "I don't need reflection. I need answers." He flipped the top sheet, revealing wire transfers routed through New Horizons LLC. Millions funneled out of our healthcare division, disguised as research funding. And all roads lead back to you, Gerald. Gasps rippled through the room. Several directors leaned forward, scanning the documents. Gerald, however, didn't flinch. He simply smoothed his cufflinks. "Desperate men forge desperate evidence," he said silkily. "But the truth is simpler. Richard Hale is unfit to lead. And today we vote." Richard's voice thundered. "Vote all you want. It won't erase the blood on your hands. You staged the accident. You forged my signature. You hid Anna and my daughter for 7 years, and now you've taken Emily." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. But before Gerald could respond, another voice cut through the noise, measured, cold. "He's telling the truth." Every head turned. Robert Klein, one of Richard's oldest allies on the board, rose slowly from his chair. His expression was calm, but his eyes glittered with something darker. Richard stared. "Robert?" Robert smiled faintly. "The truth, Richard, is that Gerald couldn't have done it without me." The room froze. "You sat across from me for years," Richard whispered. "You were in my home. You knew my family." Robert shrugged. "That's why it worked. Trust blinds faster than money. Gerald had vision, but I had access. Every schedule, every security detail, every whispered doubt you confided, I fed it straight to him." The betrayal cracked something deep inside Richard. His chest ached, his pulse roared. Around the table, directors whispered in disbelief. Gerald's smile widened, triumphant. "There you have it," Gerald said. "The man with 2 faces, standing right at your side all along." Richard lunged forward, but Daniel stepped between them. "Not here," the detective warned. "Not like this." Robert chuckled. "Wise advice. Because if you lay a hand on me, Richard, Emily vanishes before sundown." The words hit harder than any blow. Margaret, pale but resolute, slammed her notebook shut. "Then you've just confessed to conspiracy, kidnapping, and fraud in front of 12 witnesses." Gerald's mask cracked. "And who do you think will believe her? The loyal assistant? The detective past his prime? Or the man who lost everything once already and is about to lose again?" Richard's voice was steel. "No, this time the world will believe me." He gathered the documents, tucking them into his briefcase. His eyes never left Gerald's. "You've hidden behind shadows long enough. The next battle won't be in this room. It'll be in court, under the eyes of the world." Gerald's smile faltered just slightly. Robert's hand twitched, as though reaching for something in his coat pocket, but Daniel's gun was already drawn, leveled steady. "Try it," the detective said coldly. "Please." Robert froze. Richard turned to the rest of the board. "Choose your side. Stand with him, and you'll go down with him. Stand with me, and you'll help save a child's life." For the first time in years, Richard saw fear ripple across Gerald's face. The meeting adjourned in chaos. Gerald and Robert slipped out a side door, leaving behind the stink of betrayal. But Richard knew this wasn't retreat. It was repositioning. And somewhere, Emily waited in the dark, her fate tied to the storm gathering outside. The headlines called it the trial of the century. For weeks, New York had buzzed with whispers: a billionaire CEO, his vanished daughter, a corporate empire rotting from the inside. Reporters camped on courthouse steps, cameras flashing as limousines and black SUVs arrived each morning. Protesters shouted for justice, while shareholders feared ruin. Inside the Manhattan Supreme Court, the air was electric. Every seat was filled. The gallery held reporters, investors, and ordinary citizens hungry for truth. At the front, beneath the seal of New York State, sat Judge Miriam Lowell, a woman known for her sharp tongue and iron spine. Richard Hale sat at the plaintiff's table, his jaw set, Margaret Hill at his side with stacks of documents. Detective Daniel Cross leaned against the aisle, his presence both witness and shield. Across the aisle, Gerald Whitmore exuded calm arrogance. His silver hair gleamed, his suit was impeccable, and his smirk suggested victory long before the gavel fell. Beside him sat Robert Klein, eyes cold, lips pressed into a thin line. Their legal team, 3 of the city's most expensive attorneys, flanked them like armored guards. The trial began. "Mr. Hale," the prosecutor began, "tell the court what happened 7 years ago." Richard rose. His voice carried, steady despite the storm inside. "7 years ago, I lost my wife Claire in what I believed was a tragic accident. I was told that Anna Carter, Claire's best friend, and her child did not survive. I mourned them. But months ago, I discovered the truth. They were alive, hidden, erased by this man." He pointed directly at Gerald. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Gerald smirked, leaning back in his chair. The prosecutor presented the hospital record, transfer mother and child, per GW's instruction. Margaret testified how she had intercepted letters, threats, and doctored invoices. Daniel testified about surveillance photos tying Gerald to executives from Larkridge Pharmaceuticals. Piece by piece, the puzzle sharpened into a picture of corruption. But Gerald's attorney rose with a smirk. "Your Honor, the plaintiff spins fantasies, forged papers, desperate witnesses. He has no proof. His daughter is even alive." The courtroom murmured. Richard's fists clenched. Then the doors opened. Every head turned. Anna Carter entered holding Emily's hand. The gallery erupted in whispers. Cameras clicked furiously. Gerald's composure faltered for the first time. Judge Lowell banged her gavel. "Order!" Anna walked steadily to the witness stand. Emily clutched the silver pendant at her neck, eyes wide but brave. "State your name," the judge said. "Anna Carter," she answered, her voice steady despite trembling hands. "And this is Emily Hale, Richard's daughter, alive despite everything they did to erase her." The courtroom exploded. Reporters shouted, flashes blinded. Gerald shot to his feet. "This is outrageous! That child proves nothing!" But Emily stepped forward, surprising everyone. Her small voice rang out. "He's lying. He's the man from the hospital. I remember." The gallery fell silent. Judge Lowell leaned forward. "Child testimony in this court is rare, but admissible. Proceed." Emily swallowed, her hands shaking. "When I was little, Mommy was sick. Men in suits came. One of them had white hair. He told Mommy to sign papers. I was scared. I never forgot his face." She pointed at Gerald. Gasps again. Gerald's face flushed, his mask cracking. The prosecutor seized the moment. "No further questions, Your Honor." The defense scrambled. They called Robert Klein, who painted Richard as unstable, drunk, desperate. But under cross-examination, Daniel produced a recording. Robert caught on tape arranging a wire transfer to New Horizons LLC. His denials collapsed under the weight of his own voice. The prosecution hammered home the case. Gerald and Robert had conspired to siphon funds, erase witnesses, and manipulate an empire. The accident had been no accident. It was the cover that allowed them to seize power. By the final day, the jury's eyes told the story. Gerald's mask was gone. He sat stiff, lips tight, rage simmering under his skin. Robert avoided Richard's gaze entirely. The closing argument echoed through the courtroom. "This trial is not just about one man's family," the prosecutor declared. "It is about power abused, trust betrayed, and a system manipulated for greed." Richard Hale lost 7 years with his daughter because 2 men decided they could play God. Today we tell them, no one is above truth. No one is untouchable. The jury retired. Hours passed. The world waited. When the jury returned, the forewoman stood, her voice steady. "We find Gerald Whitmore guilty on all counts. We find Robert Klein guilty on all counts." The gavel struck. The courtroom erupted. Richard exhaled for the first time in weeks. Anna wept silently, clutching Emily to her chest. Margaret squeezed Richard's arm, tears glistening in her eyes. Daniel allowed himself the faintest smile. Across the aisle, Gerald's composure shattered. "This isn't over," he snarled as officers gripped his arms. "You think you've won? You don't know what's coming." But his words were drowned by the roar of the gallery, the sound of justice at last. Richard turned to Emily. She looked up at him, her small hand reaching for his. For the first time, she called him the word he had longed to hear. "Daddy." His throat tightened. He knelt, wrapping her in his arms. "I'll never let you go again." The winter sun melted into spring by the time the storm of the trial had passed. Gerald Whitmore and Robert Klein were locked away, their names stripped from the financial world they once ruled. The newspapers splashed Richard Hale's face on the front page, not as the fallen billionaire, but as the father who fought for his daughter. Yet for Richard, the victory wasn't measured in headlines. It was in the quiet moments, the laughter echoing through Anna's small Brooklyn apartment, Emily's drawings taped on the walls, the warmth of family he had thought lost forever. Still, the future needed rebuilding. On a crisp April morning, Richard led Anna and Emily through the gates of a townhouse on the Upper West Side. The facade gleamed with fresh paint, ivy climbing the brick, and a brass knocker polished to gold. "This place is huge," Emily whispered, her eyes wide. Richard knelt beside her. "It's not just big. It's yours. Ours. A home where no one can touch us again." Anna's steps slowed. She had resisted this, moving into his world, exchanging her independence for his protection. But as she stepped through the doorway, the air filled with the scent of fresh wood and lavender, her doubts softened. The rooms weren't sterile and cold like corporate mansions. They were warm, designed with care, a study lined with bookshelves, a kitchen where light spilled through tall windows, bedrooms already painted in soft colors. And in the center of the living room stood a small, upright piano, its surface gleaming. Emily gasped. "You remembered," Anna murmured. Richard smiled faintly. "Claire always wanted music in the house. I thought, maybe Emily should grow up with it too." Emily's fingers touched the keys tentatively. A single note rang out, pure and hopeful. Weeks turned into months. Richard adjusted to a new rhythm of life, not the constant drone of board meetings and stock reports, but mornings making Emily's lunch, evenings walking through Central Park with Anna at his side, laughter filling corners where silence once reigned. But healing wasn't instant. There were nights Emily woke screaming, memories of the van and the cold warehouse lingering. Richard would rush to her room, sitting by her bed until her breathing slowed. Sometimes she clutched his hand and whispered, "Don't leave." And he would promise, again and again, never. Anna, too, carried scars. Trust came slowly. She questioned every decision, every promise, yet Richard never faltered. He let her set the pace, let her see through actions rather than words that he was not the man Gerald had painted him to be. One evening, as Emily sketched in the living room, Anna stepped out onto the balcony. Richard joined her, the city lights glowing beneath them. "You've changed," she said softly. "So have you," he replied. She met his gaze, her eyes no longer hardened by survival, but softened by something almost forgotten. Hope. "Do you ever think about what life might have been if we'd never been separated?" Richard's throat tightened. "Every day. But I don't want to live in the past anymore. I just want to live here, with you, with her." Anna smiled faintly, tears shimmering. For the first time, the walls between them cracked. Not from anger or grief, but from love. Summer arrived, and with it, Emily's 7th birthday. The townhouse garden bloomed with roses and hydrangeas. Children ran across the grass, balloons bobbed in the breeze, and a table overflowed with cake and gifts. Emily wore a yellow dress, her hair tied with ribbons, laughter spilling from her like sunlight. Richard stood back, watching her run with the other children. Anna joined him, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. "She looks happy," Anna said. "She looks free," Richard corrected. Emily spotted them and ran over, her cheeks flushed. She threw her arms around Richard's waist. "Best birthday ever, Daddy!" The word still pierced him every time, but now it brought joy instead of ache. He lifted her into his arms, spinning her as she laughed. Anna's eyes softened. She whispered, "Home." That night, after the guests had gone and Emily was asleep, Richard lit the fireplace. He sat with Anna on the couch, the glow wrapping them in warmth. "I've been thinking," Richard began, "about the company, about Hale Technologies." Anna tilted her head. "What about it?" "I'm stepping down," he said simply. "Not under Gerald's terms, on mine. I've built enough walls of glass and steel. It's time I build something that matters." Anna studied him. "What will you do instead?" He glanced toward Emily's room, where faint giggles still echoed from behind the door. "Be a father. Be a man worthy of what I almost lost." Anna reached for his hand. For the first time, she didn't pull away. Their fingers laced together, steady, sure. Months later, the townhouse became more than a home. It became a sanctuary. Anna painted again, her canvases filled with light and color. Emily learned to play the piano, her small hands coaxing melodies that made Richard close his eyes and smile. And Richard himself, once consumed by ambition, discovered something far greater: peace. One evening, as autumn leaves drifted across Central Park, Richard stood with Emily on the balcony. She leaned against the railing, staring at the skyline. "Daddy?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart? Do people ever stop being scared?" Richard thought for a long moment. "No. But if you have people you love, you don't have to be scared alone." Emily nodded, clutching his hand. "Then I'm not scared anymore." Richard kissed her hair, his chest swelling with quiet pride. "Neither am I." And in that moment, beneath the glow of the city lights, the man who had lost everything finally found what mattered most. Not fortune, not power, but family. At last, they were home. Sometimes the greatest battles are not fought in boardrooms or courtrooms, but in the quiet corners of the heart. Richard's journey reminds us that no fortune, no empire, no power is worth more than family. He lost everything once, but by courage, truth, and love, he found what truly lasts: a home. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story.
Your time and heart mean the world. If this story touched you, please consider subscribing to our channel so you won't miss the next journey of hope, healing, and inspiration. Because sometimes, the stories we share can remind us of the family we dream of and the strength we already carry within.